Okay, so we're gonna start now. Thank you everyone for coming. The lecture is entitled I Live for Chicken Bones. Now, I called it that because when I was working on one of our fossils, I collected chicken bones for roughly 16 months, which is 500 days. So eventually, along the process, it became a way of life. I eventually started living for chicken bones. What that meant was every day I would go out and I would collect chicken bones from KFC or McDonald's or any fast food or restaurant chain I could find. I would bring them home. I would wash them, I would drill them, and I would wire them. So this lecture is basically me uh, sharing that experience, how it felt like to live for chicken bones. Um, 1 second. Basically, me talking about my experience collecting chicken bones. Sorry about that. So I first want to start by giving you an idea of sort of where I was physically and mentally before I started this project. So this is a picture of me in May 2023. I was 40 kilograms and I wasn't eating a lot. I wasn't sleeping a lot and I wasn't really taking care of my health. And so I would remember there were days after I came home from school that I would just sort of collapse onto bed after being so exhausted. So I knew that if I wanted some kind of longevity in my practice and I wanted to continue making work for decades, I had to do something about that. Um, so obviously started eating more and started going to the gym. But what I wanted to do was to make a project, do something so physically intense that it would force me to get into shape. So even before I started collecting chicken bones, that idea of labor, that idea of physical intensity, of sort of slaving over something was already there. And I just had to look for that, um, the right kind of project. So in June 2023, I went to a residency in Indonesia, in Jogja. And there I had a lot of ayam penyet because it was sort of the cheapest source of protein. And I started collecting the chicken bones, not really knowing what I wanted to do with them. And it wasn't until I stumbled upon this scientific paper in August 2023, where these group of scientists were trying to figure out what would be left on Earth long after we were gone. And they concluded that it would be nuclear waste, plastic, and chicken bones. So this is an example of um, sort of right place, right time, right? Because I was already prepared to act on this discovery. So I guess you could say it's luck, right? Preparation meeting opportunity. I was prepared with already collecting chicken bones, and I came across this. So this for me was the aha moment. This was when sort of 2, 3 months of thinking finally contextualized itself. And so when I came back from Jogja, which was around August, I started collecting chicken bones. And this is how many chicken bones I collected up until October. So I think this is roughly 5,000. So just for context, there's I think 70 or 80,000 chicken bones in the show. So I had a long way to go, but this was a good start. Um, but the only problem with this was most of these bones were collected from friends and family up until this point. I hadn't yet had the idea of going outside, probably because I was a bit too shy. So that's why the progress was so slow. It wasn't until I started setting rules for myself in November. So I had 7 rules for the show. The first was avoid anchorage, meaning I couldn't feel like the work I did before as an anchor. I had to let go of that anchor and sort of do something else. I had to do something unpredictable, meaning that I couldn't do drawings or paintings. I had to be frugal because I just left art school, and so I didn't have a lot of money. I had to abandon walls. This one was very important for me because, especially in Malaysia, so many art shows we go to use wall space as the primary space. I wanted to abandon that completely and use the space in between the walls. Um, the work had to be complex, but it had to be made simply, complexity from simplicity, right? All of the work is only made using 2 materials, chicken bones and wire. Number 6, be the only. I had to do something that I felt only I could do. This is a reoccurring theme in my practice, which I will elaborate on further, but B, the only is important. And seven, your judgment only. I had to do something that I felt was good. So in January, I decided to take that sort of rule making, that sort of uh, restriction restriction-based practice even further. So what I did was I created calendars for myself. This is called the 6-month plan, and every day I did gym bones, gym bones, gym bones, meal prep from January all the way to June. And this was how I lived basically for 6 months. The reason I had to meal prep was because I couldn't afford to eat out. So I had to find ways to be as frugal as possible so that I could um, sustain myself for 16 months. So you can actually see here, I write down everything I eat and how many batches of bones I collect. And if I don't collect any bones, I put no supply and I put down what I did in the gym. So I think over here you can see it like this is 1 month where I just had chicken and broccoli. That was my chicken and broccoli month. I think it's in March. And so yeah, so this is what my meal preps looked like. And so this is the bone cleaning process. I don't know why there's a red streak here, but I'm just going to ignore that. So I'm going to talk you over how I clean the bones. So in this video, they were frozen because I collected them from a cafe, but most of the time they are raw. This is a batch that's been soaking for about 5 days. So you can imagine the smell, right? And so I'm sort of draining them and I'm cleaning them and I'm draining them again. And this is the hydrogen peroxide. So a lot of people ask how I get the bones to be so white. This is how they turn white. It's a sort of a disinfectant. And then after the bones have been boiling, I put them in a little bowl. And then so once I take the bones out of the pot, I boil the next batch. So it's sort of a factory system, right? Which is sort of ironic. And so the physical intensity came mostly from this process. Cleaning the bones was a really, really labor-intensive process, actually. And so every bone had to be cleaned with a toothbrush. And basically, I would rinse them, and then I would put them in a bucket, and then I would clean the next batch. So it's basically rinse and repeat. I'll sort of show you if I skip forward a little bit. You can see that everything I did was just the same process multiplied 3 times. So I would clean bones mostly, I think around 3 to 4 times a week. So that would mean 12 batches. So that means 12 pots of bones every week, sometimes more, sometimes less. And each time I would do this, it would take me roughly 3 to 4 hours to clean. And so that's the soap water. That's what degreases and gets rid of the meat. And you can see how quickly the hydrogen peroxide acts. So this is just, I think, 20 minutes in hydrogen peroxide, and it's already this white. So there was a lot of trial and error with that. I wanted the finish to be really, really clean. And this is me cleaning the sink. And this is me throwing it away. Okay, so ignore these red lines. I really don't know why I did that. Anyways, so after cleaning the bones, my neighbor complained about them. So because the smell was so bad that they wrote me a formal letter, and they said that we are being affected by an odor coming into our unit. So I was quite concerned at this point because I was scared that this would stop me from doing the project. So I had to end up covering the buckets with some plastic wrap. And it worked. I didn't get any more complaints. So this is where I worked actually. Uh, like I said, I had to do everything on a budget, so I couldn't afford a studio, so I had to use my balcony. And so the only materials I bought during this time were these wires that I used to wire the bones because all the bones were free basically. And I remember around this time was when I started waking up every day at like 5 a.m. and sleeping at 9 p.m. because working on a balcony, it gets quite hot around 1 p.m. So I wanted to finish my 6 hours of work before 1 p.m. So I had to do like 5 to 1. And usually when I do projects, I have 6 hour blocks in a day. And that's been quite consistent for a few years now. Every time I start a new project, um, I set aside a few months of like really intense work, and each day has to be at least 6 hours. Because that's I feel like that's the only way I can work with that kind of intensity. So this is what this looks like when they're wired, and this is where I dried the bones. Okay, so after the first 6 month plan, I was quite obsessed with that idea of regimenting my life in a certain way. So I made a second 6 month plan, and this one I used a ruler because the first one I didn't use a ruler. So now this is the improvement. And you can see here, I actually put down everything I did. So, okay, if let's just say I didn't go to the gym because I was meeting Nasha, I would put that in. And you can see here I had like mala chicken for I don't know how many, like a whole month basically. And you know, I think living like this, uh, before I did this project, this would have seemed insane. But now that I've done it, it's actually quite nice. I quite like this. So I might make calendars for myself every year and do the same thing. So I've mentioned to a few people that before becoming an artist, I wanted to become a tailor. That was my first real interest in terms of actually pursuing a career. But tailoring isn't a space you go to develop ideas because it stayed the same for 100 years. So I brought ideas from tailoring over into my practice. So you can see that when I made these works, I actually did pattern drafting basically, right? And so these are the roles for that huge piece. This is how I stored them. Now, up until this point, I had no idea what I wanted to do with these roles. I was just wiring blindly. The reason I kept them in rows is because my balcony was kind of small, so I had no space to lay the bones out. So the only choice was to roll them up like fabric. So it's kind of interesting that even though one moves away from one's initial interest, you end up circling back to what you initially started with. That was tailoring and fashion, actually. Funnily enough, I didn't realize that until I started doing this lecture a few weeks ago. And so in August, I had that idea of making this piece. And honestly, thinking about it now, this wasn't the initial idea for this piece. I wanted to make something much, much smaller, but I made this diorama just to see if it was possible. And this was also when I got connected to my fabricator, Chong Yong. And Chong Yong, he's an artist himself, so he can sort of he can help contextualize and materialize ideas that seem kind of absurd, which was this actually. So I sent this diorama to him for him to see if it was possible. And it was. So while he was making that, I started working on the music and the light and the set and sort of the frame of the work. So this is how I made the music on my iPad with GarageBand and a notebook. Um, and because I didn't have a desk because my desk was on my balcony, so I had to do everything in my room like this, which was quite charming. So this is a studio balcony update. So you can see here that I had already made a few floor pieces. There was that incense holder. This is where I wired the bones. I would look out into this golf course forest thing. That was my vacuum, and this is where I would dry the bones. So basically, the entire project, excluding the metal frame that my fabricator made, everything was done in this sort of small, tiny space. And looking back at it, I think it's quite absurd actually that something so big came from something so simple and small. Yeah, so this is another example of my love for tailoring and pattern drafting. You can see that uh, when I first cut it out, it looks super chaotic, but once I fold it in, you can see how graceful it becomes. It was really important for me to not use any pencils or paint. I wanted to actually make it and not just illustrate it. And so you can see this is what it eventually became. So in October, work started to really ramp up 1 month before the show, and my fabricator had most of the work done. So now we were trying to figure out how we would wrap it around, right? Just like how a tailor would fit a suit to a client's body. This was the body and the bones were the fabric. And so we found a way. We had to sort of wrap it around, cut it, readjust it, and we did it bone by bone, just to get that perfect fit. Because if you've seen the show in real life, you'll see that it's super, super tight. And it was my intention to make it look almost impossible to make. It had to look improbable, like you couldn't imagine how it was made. Um, yeah. So you can see that actually comes in parts. A lot of people ask me how I get that huge thing into the gallery. Well, my fabricator was very smart. He made it into parts and you can dismantle them. But he did such a good job that you can't see exactly where it splits open unless I tell you. And this is them uh, assembling it inside the gallery. And so we have recorded this, like a little time lapse, which I won't show today, actually. And this is another picture. So the reason I brought up all of this, the reason why I brought up my whole lifestyle, the meal prep, the gym, the calendar, where I worked, how I worked, my kitchen, how I cleaned the bones, is because I think it says something about how I work as an artist. I'm going to clarify my artistic position right now. I think whenever I tell someone I'm an artist, the common assumption is that I spend most of my time working in this area, thinking about the shapes, the colors, the textures, the materials, the lyrics, the melodies, images, and forms. These are all things that are inside the frame, things that you can immediately see. And while it is true that I spend a lot of time in this area, I would say I spend just as much time thinking about all of these things, right? The myths, the controversies, the rumors, the histories, the legends, the everything around it, especially the law. Um, the reason I spend so much time here is because I think that all of these things around it shape the work just as much as the stuff inside it. So I think a really good example would be Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy in 2010. The reason why that album was so hyped up is because it happened right after that Taylor Swift 2008 VMA incident. So it was a controversy that created the conditions for that album to emerge. I think that's a lot of contemporary art is about that. It's about context. It's about how things emerge from certain contexts. And so what I wanted to do with this project in particular was to first consider the lifestyle, consider the person that was making the work, and to think of that as something that I could change, something that I could design. So to think of the lifestyle I was living as part of the work, and to also think about the lore, to create work that had the potential for lore. So now that when you find out that all of these bones were collected by hand over a 16-month period, that creates lore, that creates a different context for the work to exist. And more and more, I think that all work is frame. Most art is actually frame, not so much what's inside of it. So this is something I was really thinking about during my time making this. Another thing I was thinking about was money and finances, right? Obviously, because this show was quite it's not immediately profitable. If I wanted to make money, I would have just done paintings and drawings, but I didn't. So I had to think of a way to sustain myself. And I came to the realization that really, I think the three main things we have in life are money, time, and energy, right? And so I'm young, so I have energy and time, but I don't have money. Sort of in the middle of your life, you have money and energy, but you don't have time. And then late in life, when you're old, you have money and time, but no energy. So if I had time and energy, but no money, I needed to find ways to maximize and to exploit these two things. So to put very simply, I had to find problems that I could not solve with money, but that I could solve with time and energy, right? Which is actually more difficult because money solves most problems. So finding problems that money can't solve was actually quite challenging. I think one of our fossils is one of those problems for me because, I mean, obviously one of our fossils had to be good. I wouldn't put out work that I didn't think was good, but it had to be cheap, right? Because I couldn't afford many things. So it couldn't be fast, right? If it's good and cheap, it can't be fast. And you can sort of pick two. It's very rare that a project ends up in the middle. So that's why it took me 16 months to make. It wasn't actually by design. If I could have done it faster, I would have. But just by the logic of how work is done, that just wasn't possible. So I had to sort of strategize about that. A lot of strategy for the show. So this is something else I was thinking about too. And this is how it relates to my sort of artistic position because uh, a lot of people have been asking me why I made that jump from like paintings and drawings to uh, whatever this is, installation or sculpture. For me, that jump isn't so surprising because when you look at sort of my entire body of work, not as a fine artist, but in my life, I first started off doing magic with card tricks, and then I did a bit of cardistry, and then I did a bit of fashion, and then I did a little bit of stitching and embroidery, and then I did painting and drawing, and now this. So it seems to me that I'm more of a cowboy, right? A farmer is someone who finds a plot of land and adds value to it over time. The farmer nurtures and cultivates, whereas the cowboy just wants to find new pieces of land. The excitement for the cowboy is being in areas where he is uncomfortable or unfamiliar with. And for me, that's where I find the most excitement in life. I find myself to be the most energetic when I'm in places that I'm not comfortable or familiar with. And so, but I wouldn't say I'm a full cowboy because a lot of my work still has to do with time, labor, and change, something that hasn't changed throughout my entire life. So I would say I'm sort of an 8 out of 10 cowboy. And yeah. So uh, the reason I brought all of this up, changing my lifestyle, looking at how else I could design my lifestyle, and looking at myself as a blank canvas, a project, is because I think very early on I understood that my practice was not about what can I make now. I wasn't so interested in the output of my labor. I was more interested in who can I be now. So it was more of an internal thing. The reason I asked who can I be now is because I sort of have a very different feeling after this project. I started to have a very different feeling about what I wanted to live for. Going back to being the only, I think one thing I want when I'm on my deathbed and when I die is I want to be able to say that I have truly become myself. I have truly become the person I was always meant to be. And I think by asking who can I be now, that's a question that will help me reach that. I don't want to be the best. I want to be the only person who can do what I can do. And that's an even higher bar than being the best. And it takes a lot of time and energy to get to that realization. And so for me, what has been helpful in moving towards moving in that direction has been asking, who can I be now? To not look at myself as a uh, fixed being that doesn't change, but to look at myself as an entity that's becoming, always changing, always shifting. So that question, who can I be now, is so central to my life and my work. And I never do anything before asking that question. Uh, I wanted to be the kind of person who was healthy, who was physically strong, who was obsessed, and who was patient. And so I did a project that helped me become that kind of person, which was one of our fossils. So to sum everything up, you can think of this project as personal transformation through art making. I think when I boil everything down, that seems to be what this project is about, and that seems to be what my future projects might entail. I look at myself as part of the work. I don't look at myself as merely someone who puts out work for the sake of it, but someone who puts out work in the context of my life. I don't separate what I do from my life. I think it really has become a way of life. So that's actually the end of it. Very short lecture. We have roughly 9 to 10 minutes left for questions. So I will entertain all questions. But we don't have that much time. So if you have any questions, you can text me on Instagram too or WhatsApp and I'll answer them. But yeah, just feel free to turn on your mic and speak or put it in the chat. Where will the structure go after the expo? Okay, it will travel. It will travel the world, basically.
Yeah. Hey, Adam, thanks for the invitation.
Hi, Max.
Hi. Very interesting lecture. Thank you. I think I can well relate to your process there. I had some several kind of close to that experience related to like bicycle tubings back in 2013. I think I collect quite a lot. But my question would be like the final shape of the work. How do you feel now in correspondence to the process about this
Yeah,
tube structure?
that's a good question. It's funny because I didn't actually think too much about how the final shape would turn out during the process. What I was doing actually, I was looking back at the previous work that I'd done as a painter and a draftsman. And let me show you this one piece that I did a while ago that sort of affected this. So I did this work, right, with that sort of squiggle. And so I wasn't trying to I wasn't trying to make something new. I was trying to look at my older work and contextualize it in new form. So I thought, what if that squiggle wasn't thread? What if it was bones? Right. And so I took that and I put that into gallery. So I like to think of this installation as one of my drawings brought to life. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, in a way. Thank you. It
Yes, thank
reminds
you,
me
Matt.
a lot of something like a hearing tube or something, which is like a structure which could be an instrument or something to listen to something.
Yes.
Um,
I think that one of the things about this work, what I think is the strength of this work is that it has the ability to accumulate a lot of meanings over time, that it's not stable. Okay, someone asked how I designed the scent. Well, the scent was actually a collaboration between me and Aesop. They provided some of their scent, so I used that. The thought process, well, I wanted to work with Aesop for a while because I have the book actually, right? I have the Aesop book, and a lot of their sort of philosophy about how they work really related to me. So when they approached me for the project, I felt like that was the perfect match. Okay, we have 7 more minutes. More questions, please. Yeah, so that's another thing that I didn't mention. One of our fossil tracks in the Adam Phong body of work. So are you talking about how the music is part of my body of work, or what are you referring to? Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think it's just an example of retrohesion. When one is doing something in the present, it feels like it's disconnected from everything, and it doesn't make sense. But looking back at it uh in retrospect, things start to become cohesive, and then they start to feel inevitable that, oh, of course it happened like that. It couldn't have happened any other way. So I think while this show right now feels out of place, I think in a decade it will feel so inevitable and it will make so much sense. Because ultimately, I don't approach a project thinking about how it would look in a year. I start thinking in decades. Uh, Especially after this project. All of my projects now have to have this kind of super long time frame. If not, I'm not interested in doing it really. This project really forced me to think long term. Yeah, I just wouldn't be. Yeah, so the gym routine question. Someone asked if things would be different if I didn't have a gym routine. Yeah, I don't think I would be able to do a project like this because standing for 6 hours straight uh is quite tiring. So I needed to be physically strong. No, I don't doubt the medium I choose because I don't put that much value in it. Like I probably will not do anything bone related after this. I'm quite indifferent to medium. I'm stylistically unloyal. I'm not loyal to a medium or a style because I don't think of those things as the crux of my practice. I think what's important to me in my practice is, first of all, my obsession, and second of all, asking that question, who can I be now? So it's where these questions lead me that for me add value, not so much what I'm working with. Yeah, I'm loyal to the pursuit of law because I think in the long run, works of art or pieces of culture that have some kind of staying power ultimately have the potential for a lot of law. Uh, I chose chicken bones. Oh, I should have mentioned this. Well, because that scientific paper specifically annotated nuclear waste, plastic, and chicken bones. And I felt that chicken bones were the most absurd of the three because usually in conversations about what might outlast humanity, plastic and nuclear waste, they're sort of always there, but chicken bones, they don't really get discussed. So I think it's my job as an artist to suggest new places that we could turn our attention to. I think that's one of the things that artists do, right? We suggest new places to turn our attention to, and then we charge those areas with value. So that's what I wanted to do with this show. Okay, we have 3 more minutes, so I think I can take two more questions. Why? Well, because it was cheap and durable. Ultimately, I had to just go with what I could afford at that time. So the music in the gallery doesn't have meaning because I'm not really interested in meaning. I'm interested in experiences. I think what I like is when an experience takes me out of my daily life and puts me into an environment. So I wanted the music to do that. But more so, I think the music is just another reason for you to stay in the gallery for a bit longer. How do you feel about the correlation of self-consumption and production? Um, Max, that's a really deep question, and I have 2 minutes. I will answer to you later because that I have thought about that, but I need to formalize the thoughts. Do you consider the work as an exercise in sustainability? Funny enough, it's not. I really wasn't thinking about any kind of climate emergency while I was making this. I just wanted to make something I liked, and it just so happened to um sort of fit into this big narrative. My feeling is that this show or this project is just a small contribution in the grand scheme of things. And right now that's the climate revolution, right? So whatever comes out during this time will in some way be connected to that movement. We are sort of unknowing pawns. So I think in 10 years, this will be seen as a Malaysian artist's effort to contribute to this narrative, even though it wasn't my intention. But ultimately, you are what the most amount of people say you are. What's next? I don't know what I'm gonna do next, but it won't be boring. It won't be boring. Yeah, man, it's really heavy. I think it's like I actually think it's 600 kilos because when my fabricator hung it up in his studio, the ceiling cracked. So it can only be hung up with a concrete ceiling. So very, very heavy. Okay, I have 1 minute left. I'll take one more question and then we all have to leave. Okay, so there's no more questions. Thank you everyone for attending the lecture. I really appreciate it. The recording will be out in a couple days, so I'll send that. Thank you so much. Goodbye.